Evening, everyone. I'm Owen O'Cohine. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Roads and Transport Society. Unfortunately, our Chairman can't be here tonight. He sends his apologies. It's an anniversary of a bereavement. He has, however, left me excellent notes, so you'll forgive me as I'm reading these out. I wouldn't normally read out from here, but the notes are better than I could come up with myself. An introduction to tonight, TII, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, or as it was then known, the NRA, successfully signed 8 hard-toll PPP schemes between the years 2003 and 2007. In addition to the previously signed Second Westlink agreement and latterly the M50 upgrade PPP schemes. All of these schemes assured the completion of the major interurban corridor, the fulfilment of the objectives set out in the National Plan 2006, and brought much needed private sector finance into the development of our national road network. As the financial crisis swept across the world in and around 2008 and 2009, NRA focused to availability payment-based forms of public-private partnership and was able to continue on its ambitious roads programme in the form of the N17 and 18 Gert to Tuam, which is well underway, and the recent delivery of the Newlands Cross PPP scheme. Noteworthy also is the imminent signing of the N25 New Ross PPP scheme and the M11 Enniscorthy PPP scheme, which I'm told was signed this afternoon. And these will bring a much needed boost to the southeast economy, as well as much needed improvements in terms of road safety with the outturn of these schemes. Of these projects, particularly the Newlands Cross project and the removal of the last set of traffic lights between Dublin and Dunkettle, it's important, I suppose, to note, bears testament to the need for the government to continue to look at innovative financing solution to transportation infrastructure and indeed to continue to invest in our roads programme. So we've most, I won't say unusual, but we've a different proposition tonight to what we normally have, in that we have multiple parties to the contract here to present to us. So first of all, on behalf of the client side, we have Kieran Kelly, who's a graduate of Queen's University and chartered engineer with the IEI. He has over 23 years experience in road design and construction in the public sector, has worked for Kildare, Fingal and Dún Laoghaire County Councils on motorway projects in the Greater Dublin area and joined the NRA in 2000. He'd been involved in many road infrastructure projects with the NRA, including M50 Contract 1, N4 Lucan Bypass and Tranche 1 of the motorway service areas. And the reason he's here tonight is because he acted as the authority's representative on the 11 PPP project, which includes Newlands Cross, and he is currently the regional manager for the Western region with TII. Kieran's going to give us the context of the Newlands Cross upgrade scheme and a brief history of the planning, design and procurement stages. After that then we've Yvonne Jones, an engineering graduate of UCD, as well as having an MSc in construction law and arbitration, a chartered engineer and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Yvonne was PPP co-representative for the N11 Arklow at New PPP. She has 22 years experience in the design, construction and management in Ireland and the UK. 12 years in PPP projects in Ireland, in Ireland and DBFO in the UK, including the M25 and the A249 Stockbury to Sheerness DBFO scheme. So Yvonne's going to give a description of the procurement process from the PPP co perspective, an overview of the challenges in obtaining finance during the economic crisis and the funding solution that was put in place. And also the role of the PPP company itself during the constructions and operations stages. And then finally we have Darren Devan of BAM, who's an engineering graduate of Trinity College and a chartered engineer. Darren has 16 years experience in the design and construction management in both the public and private sectors on a wide variety of civil engineering and building projects, including among others the Ringsend wastewater treatment works, the City West Lewis line, the M50 Southeastern motorway and the Dundalk Western bypass. And Darren is going to give us an overview of the construction methodology used during the construction of the Newlands Cross upgrade, including traffic management arrangements, utility diversions, and value engineering solutions utilised to ensure a successful project delivery. Right, so after all of that, I think I'll hand over to our three speakers, and starting with Kieran, I think.
Well, thank you, Owen, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of Yvonne, Darren, and myself, this opportunity to thank the Roads and Transportation Society of Engineers Ireland for inviting us here to give this presentation tonight. The three of us have been centrally involved in the delivery of the Newlands Cross scheme, which the three of us centrally involved in the delivery of the scheme, along with many other people over the last number of years. As Owen mentioned, I acted as the authority's representative on the PPP project on behalf of the National Roads Authority, now Transport Infrastructure Ireland. I was involved with the project, however, right from the feasibility stage as far back as 2006, and saw it to completion earlier this year. So, as Owen mentioned, I will speak about the context of the scheme, just touch on the planning and the design stages of the project and the difficulties experienced in bringing the project to construction. Yvonne Jones, as Owen mentioned, was the PPP co-representative on the project, and Yvonne will give you an insight into the procurement stage and the delivery of the project from the PPP company's perspective. And Darren was the contracts manager for BAM Civil Limited, who were the contractor responsible for the construction of the Newlands Cross upgrade scheme. And Darren will address the engineering aspects of the project and the major challenges that had to be overcome during the construction stage. So for my section of the presentation, I'll just try and put the scheme into some sort of context. As most of you will be aware, the Newlands Cross Junction is located on the N7 dual carriageway in the southwest of Dublin, just outside the M50 motorway. Prior to the upgrade, it was an at-grade signal control junction connecting the N7 Nace Road with the R113 Fonthill and Bellegarde roads. Following the widening of the N7 Nace Road to dual 3-lane between Newlands Cross and Nace in the late 90s and early 90s, and the upgrading of the M50 motorway and the adjacent Red Cow interchange, the existing Newlands Cross junction experienced severe congestion, particularly in the AM and PM peaks. And with the major interurban network then on track for completion by the end of 2010, this left Newlands Cross Junction as the last link to be completed in the N7, N8 and N9 corridors. I'm sure you've all heard our mantra that in relation to the scheme, that we were removing the last set of traffic lights between Dublin and Cork. We were in fact removing the last bottleneck on the network between Belfast and Cork, Belfast and Limerick, and Belfast and Waterford. Any of you who used the N7 on your daily commute into work will be all too familiar with the congestion at this junction. The junction had become infamous with daily mentions on AA Roadwatch traffic reports. It is one of the busiest junctions in the country, with in excess of 80,000 vehicles passing through the junction every day prior to the upgrade. And up to 15% of these vehicles were HGVs. So this photo shows the original at-grade junction, and you can see the level of congestion on the approaches to the junction, which were well over capacity, with vehicles subject to significant queuing and delays. Delays of between 15 and 20 minutes at peak times were not unusual, and this was a major disbenefit to commuters and businesses in the southwest of Dublin. and for traffic travelling between the Greater Dublin area and the metropolitan areas of Limerick and Cork. In 2005, South Dublin County Council appointed ARP consulting engineers to carry out a feasibility study to consider what improvements could be made to the Newlands Cross Junction, with an emphasis on measures to improve capacity. A number of options were considered: at-grade improvements, grade-separated improvements, and even an offline realignment of the N7. This process concluded that a grade separation of the N7 main line from the remainder of the junction was the most feasible and was necessary to achieve the step change improvement in capacity that was required. Two grade separated solutions were given detailed consideration: an overpass where the N7 main line was taken up and over the R113 on the flyover, and an underpass where the N7 was brought below the R113, which would remain at grade. There were significant construction issues with the underpass option. Up to 6 metres of bedrock would have had to be excavated, which, given the location of the junction, would have been a time-consuming and onerous task. It was estimated that the construction of the underpass would take approximately 1 year longer to construct than the overpass option. It was also estimated that the cost of underpass option would be approximately 50% greater than that of the overpass. Now, the overpass option had greater operational impacts in terms of noise and visual impact. However, it was felt that these impacts could be mitigated by use of low noise surfacing, noise barriers, and a combination of sympathetic material selection and landscape design. Therefore, having considered the environmental impacts, the engineering characteristics, and the economics of both options, it was decided to proceed with the overpass option as the preferred junction choice. At about this time, it'd be mid-2007, Kildare County became the authority on the scheme under a Section 85 agreement with South Dublin County Council, and ARP were retained to develop the preliminary design and the EIS for the project. This drawing shows the final design layout of the Newlands Cross Junction. The N7 is taking over the Bellegarde Fonthill roads on the new flyover, and the main line, comprising 3 lanes in each direction, is free flow through the junction. Now, all previous turning movements at the junction have been retained and also had to be retained during the construction period, and this proved quite a challenge to the construction of the junction. Throughout the scheme, all previous pedestrian and cycle routes have also been retained and improved, and there is full controlled pedestrian access through the junction. Designed to minimise the amount of permanent land take. As the northern boundary was quite extensively developed with residential and commercial properties, all of the land take was confined to the southern side of the N7. And in order to limit the amount of land take to the south, the scheme was brought as tight as possible to the northern boundary. As space to construct the grade-separated junction was at a premium, lands were also acquired temporarily under the CPO to allow for temporary traffic lanes to be constructed to the south of the scheme. And you will hear more from Darren about this later. But these lands to the south of the scheme, They all had to be reinstated and returned to the original landowners, including Newlands Golf Club, which is located in here, on completion of the works. Space had also to be provided for the future provision of Metro West. And the plan for Metro West is that it will run down the Fonthill Road, pass below the new flyover, and continue on down the Bellegarde Road. That was another constraint on the project. Now, just briefly to touch on the project appraisal. Arup undertook the initial traffic modelling and appraisal, and this was later updated by RPS. An area-wide traffic model was developed from the DTO's transportation model. The DTO model incorporated all of the committed transport proposals in the Greater Dublin area, as well as estimates of population growth for the region based on the Dublin area development plans. A local traffic model was then developed specifically for the Newlands analysis from the data on traffic movements and network changes that were extracted from the DTO model. Opening and design year AM peak Saturn models were then produced to forecast future traffic volumes with and without the proposed junction upgrade. And then traffic flows from the Saturn models were used as inputs to junction capacity models, which allowed for detailed consideration of the junction layout and also for the signal control operation. The traffic model showed that there would be some rerouting to the improved N7 following the junction upgrade, and particularly at the peak periods. The cost-benefit analysis for the Newlands Cross upgrade scheme was carried out using the traffic data from the traffic modelling report and from detailed cost estimates for each element of the project. The results of the cost-benefit analysis are very encouraging. A benefit-to-cost ratio of 4.95 for the low traffic growth scenario, and as high as 11.7 for the high growth scenario. And that shows that significant economic travel benefits were shown to accrue from the proposed scheme. And by far the largest element of the benefits being the value of time savings resulting from the reduction in traffic congestion on the network. So improved journey times will benefit both businesses and commuters living and working in the southwest of Dublin, and will facilitate the more efficient movement of people and goods between the Greater Dublin area and Limerick and Cork. It was recognised at a very early stage that the successful delivery of the project would be very much dependent on the success of the traffic management arrangements that were to be put in place during the construction phase. And any disruption to traffic flows, to the existing traffic flows, would have to be kept to an absolute minimum. Now, extensive design was carried out by Arup at the time to develop a logical construction sequence and associated traffic management arrangements. The possible traffic management arrangements were tested out using microsimulation software to determine whether queue lengths and delay times were going to be acceptable. This exercise proved extremely valuable, as it became apparent that in order to achieve acceptable traffic through the work site, additional lands would have to be acquired from the southern side of the N7 on a temporary basis to allow for the construction of temporary traffic lanes. So we caught this in time, and the CPO drawings were adjusted accordingly prior to publication. So it's a testament to the early work that was done in developing a robust traffic management plan. The contractor subsequently implemented these same traffic management arrangements by and large. In order then to de-risk the project, it was decided to carry out advanced works ahead of the main construction contract. The Cork to Dublin gas transmission main ran along the eastbound verge of the old N7, and it was considered too great a risk to the project to have the diversion of this strategic gas main left to be carried out during the main construction contract. So a separate contract was entered into with Bord Gáis Networks to divert this gas main into the greenfield lands that were acquired to the south of the N7. There was also a utilities investigation contract put out to identify the nature and location of the extensive services within the site of the proposed upgrade works. Archaeological testing of the strip of acquired land to the south of the N7 was undertaken in advance of the gas main diversion, and nothing of significance was encountered there. And due to the urban nature of the site, no further archaeological works were required. So just briefly to go through the history of the scheme. Kildare County Council published the CPO and EIS for the scheme in late 2007, approximately 2 years after the project commencement. So we managed to get from to publication in 2 years, which is good going. The scheme was approved by An Bord Pleanála with conditions in 2008. The advanced works were undertaken in 2008 and 2009, and as I said, to divert that Dublin to Cork gas transmission main. And then a D&B tender competition commenced in mid-2008, almost as soon as we got approval from An Bord Pleanála for the scheme. However, the D&B tender competition was abandoned in late 2008. The economy in Ireland collapsed and there was no longer funding available to proceed to construction. So then, what to do next? We've been going so well up to that point. So in February 2009, the board of the National Roads Authority decided to progress a number of major national road schemes as PPP projects, mainly due to the fact that Exchequer funding was no longer available to deliver them by more traditional means. So smaller schemes were combined to achieve a single project of sufficient scale to fit the PPP model. The Newlands Cross scheme and the Arklow Rathnew scheme in Wicklow were high on the authority's priority list, and these were combined along with the service area scheme into one PPP project. RPS consulting engineers were appointed at this time as the authority's technical advisors, and a PPP procurement process commenced in June 2009. Following a lengthy competitive dialogue process, final tenders were received in May 2011, and a preferred tenderer was selected in June of that year. Again, the challenging economic environment in Ireland at the time made it extremely difficult to bring this project to financial close. And you'll hear more from Yvonne shortly on that. But we eventually got there, and the contract was to BAM PPP PGGM joint venture in April 2013. This slide shows the authority's project team responsible for the delivery of the project. Now, as with all PPP projects, the NRA, or TII as we are now, acted as the contracting authority. So the NRA entered into cooperation agreements with the relevant local authorities in order to lease the lands required to execute the works and to operate and maintain the road infrastructure. Agreements were entered into with Kildare County Council and South Dublin County Council in relation to the Newlands Cross scheme, and with Wicklow and Wexford County Councils regards the N11 scheme. The authority's financial advisors, the National Development Agency, KPMG Corporate Finance. Our technical advisors were RPS Consulting Engineers, led by Angela Grady, and the site team led by Michael Brazel. And our legal advisors were McCann Fitzgerald Solicitors. So this slide shows the PPP contract structure. The NRA enters into a project agreement with the PPP company, who I mentioned in this case were a joint venture between BAM PPP and PGGM, who are a Dutch pension fund administrator. Now, the PPP company in turn enters into a design and construct contract and an operation and maintenance contract. And on this particular project, both contractor and operator were BAM Civil Limited. The PPP company also enters into funding agreements with the project funders. And the project funders in this case were the European Investment Bank and Bank of Ireland. So just briefly then on the payment mechanism on the contract. And the construction contract is, the duration is 28 months, and that's for the entire project. The Newlands Cross element had to be delivered within 21 months. The PPP will then operate and maintain the project road for a period of 25 years, so that's up to 2040. There were no construction payments made by the authority during the construction. And as you're probably aware, there are no tolls on any of this, any sections of this PPP project. So monthly availability payments are paid by the authority on completion of the construction stage of the entire project. And payments will be made for the next 25 years as long as the road is available for traffic. Non-availability charges will apply if the road or a lane is closed to traffic during the operations period. Now, for more detail on this, the PPP's perspective on the project, I hand you over to Yvonne. Thank you.
I just need to exit full screen. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Okay, good evening everybody, and thank you Owen and Kieran for the introductions. I'm Yvonne Jones. I work for BAM PPP Limited, and I'm the PPP representative for the N11 Arklow Rathnew PPP, which includes Newlands Cross. So for my element of the presentation, I'm probably recapping Kieran somewhat on the description of the overall PPP project. I'll just talk a little bit about public-private partnership in general, bring you back to the timescale for the procurement of the project and the prevailing economic conditions, give you a description of the project finance solution that we arrived at the time, and finish with a little bit about the PPP role during construction and operations. So the overall PPP project consists of 4 sections. Section A is the N11 in Wicklow from Rathnew down to Arklow, which replaced a section of single carriageway. It was originally the N11, but the NRA, if I can still call them that, published orders amending it to a motorway, and it opened as a motorway on the 13th of July. 2 grade separated junctions. It's been a lovely scheme to work on. You generally identify where you are on the scheme by the pubs. So grade separated junction at the Beehive and at Jack White's. Section B of the project then was upgrade works to a section of existing motorway heading south from the end of the site to about a kilometre above Clock Roundabout. The upgrade works were mainly drainage rehabilitation, ducting, emergency roadside telephones, and we also started operations and maintenance on that from the beginning of the project. Section C then is the Gorey Motorway Services area, grade separated junction. The services area then is an amenity building, fuel station and car parking, and the operation then of the services area is out with the jurisdiction of our PPP contract, but we do maintain the grade separated junction and approach roads. And Section D then, which I won't steal anybody's thunder and speak any more about, coming on to that. So just in case now you think that you've wandered into the wrong presentation or I'm in the wrong presentation, the reason that all the elements of the PPP project are so important is that, as Kieran said, one of the concepts of public-private partnerships is that until the asset is available for use, the private partner doesn't get paid by the government or by the authority. So now that all elements are available for use, payment to PPP Co has commenced. As Kieran has said, it's an availability payment mechanism. That means that we looked at all our costs at tender stage and worked out what availability payment would be required to the public-private partnership company at tender, and that was our tender. There are other, as you're aware, and as Kieran has already said, the other payment mechanism, I suppose, is toll roads, where the PPP company collects toll revenue. And the N11 is the second non-toll road project after the M50. The M50 PPP scheme doesn't include the link. Just to say, I suppose, that the NRA, I think in the early stages, did offer us a mechanism where 2 elements of the project were complete, that some payment could start, and there are accommodation projects which we work on where once one building becomes available, an availability payment commences and then steps up until all are complete. So again, we don't have PPP projects without the public sector identifying a project and performing the necessary assessments to decide that PPP is the appropriate procurement mechanism. The reference there, so BAM, PPP and PDGM, we are sponsors or investors, I suppose is the best way to describe us. Coming close to financial close and the signing of the public-private partnership contract, we set up what's known as a special purpose vehicle, or the PPP company. The reason for that is to do with the financing. Because of the nature of the financing, each public-private partnership company only performs that project. That means that any revenues it earns, the lenders have first call on. So for each of the N11, and I'm pleased M11 as of today, that we have individual PPP companies. As Kieran has said then, we invest, as sponsors and investors, we invest equity and have an investment return on the equity. The lenders then lend and get capital and interest in return, and we also then have to let both construction and O&M contracts, which in this case is with BAM Civil in both instances. So one of the public-private partnership features is that it's non-recourse finance, so the sponsors don't provide any form of guarantee to the so the lenders then look very carefully at the project parties, including the authority, rather than looking at the value of the road or any other assets which may be involved. So what they're looking at ultimately is that once construction is complete, that the public-private partnership company has a revenue stream. So as I've noted there, the security for the lenders is the contracts. So they perform a significant level of due diligence on the project before signing the contracts. In our case then, the public-private partnership company is the one that takes on a considerable amount of debt between project signing and the completion of construction. We look for our construction and O&M partners then to be what's called back-to-back on the project agreement with the construction and operations agreement. So the construction contract that we would have let, which included Newlands Cross, was a fixed price. So as Kieran said earlier then, the N11 Arklow Rathnew was one of the NRA's second set of PPP projects. They published an ODU notice in June 2009, to which we responded. Procurement continued then through 2010, where obviously there were some significant changes in the country. We submitted a tender in May of 2011, and we were appointed preferred tender in June of 2011, the end of June 2011, and achieved financial close in April 2013. So, if you can cast your mind back to the to that particular timescale, I don't know whether it's safe to say that the Celtic Tiger died in 2008. From looking back at the times, we were the first Eurozone country to officially enter recession in 2008. In 2009, I believe our government's debt had become the riskiest in the Eurozone and surpassed even Greece at the time. So it was in that climate. So we had tendered based on an authority term sheet where the NRA had advised us. Again, it would have been based on what KPMG and the NDFA advised at the time were appropriate financial rates to use. When we were appointed preferred tender, then all the parties involved, so the NRA, KPMG, NDFA, and ourselves, performed a market sounding exercise where we approached the international commercial banks to assess their interest in lending to the project. So just looking back at the soundings that were done at the time, there were 18 international banks approached. I think of those, 12 were not interested in lending to an Irish project at that time. There were quite a number actually who just didn't respond, which you think it sounds awful, but so many of the banks were in crisis themselves at the time. I think they probably really didn't know which way was up, let alone to respond to inquiries. And it wasn't, sorry, to say, it's important to say that the banks they would have been very familiar with the National Roads Authority as a client, familiar with the contract structure, familiar with ourselves as sponsors, and familiar with BAM Civil as a contractor, and no issue with any of those, just with the economic situation in Ireland at the time that caused them such concern. So thankfully, the European Investment Bank, I would have said even well before that we had gotten involved in terms of tendering, had agreed in principle to provide 50% of the debt for the project. And again, luckily, Bank of Ireland agreed that they would be able to provide the other 50% of the debt, which sounds fabulous because that obviously gives you 100% of the debt. The difficulty at the time was that the European Investment Bank has particular criteria for the banks it co-funds with, and at that time Bank of Ireland didn't meet those criteria. So ourselves, with the NRA and their financial advisors, assessed the situation, put forward a number of different approaches to funding the project, discussed those, and had looked at a particular solution, which was advance funding. This, again, because the situation was so unusual, it wasn't something that had been done before, so all the parties worked in terms of modelling, addressing the financial model to see how that would work. So having gone quite a way down this route, there were still some concerns of the European Investment Bank and probably all the parties that weren't being addressed. At that stage, the possibility of the National Pension Reserve Fund providing a contingent facility arose, which provided an overall better solution. I'm sure you're aware it's not so many years ago that the National Pension Reserve Fund, I think, had been spent several times over, so certainly it was lucky that we were able to use that as a contingent facility. And the lenders were in a position to provide fixed rate loans to the project. So having arrived at a solution, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to the banks then to understand that all the contracts are in place correctly, to understand that all the parties will be capable of doing what they set out to do. For them, construction is perceived as a very risky phase of the project because the revenue stream doesn't start until that's complete. They look as well at the amount of cash that the project company will be bringing in to ensure that we're able to cover all of our liabilities. So that's just to show all the parties, as Kieran has said, RPS, the authority site representative. The PPP company then is the N11 Arklow Rathnew PPP Limited, with BAM PPP and PGGM, who are a Dutch pension fund, as co-sponsors. Then our lenders at the Bank of Ireland, European Investment Bank, with this contingent facility from the National Pensions Reserve Fund. Capita are there, the lender's technical advisor. BAM Civil and Mott MacDonald are the design and construction element, and then BAM Civil as operator. So just in that time period, BAM PPP closed both the N11 and Schools Bundle 3. They were the only two public-private partnerships to close in that time due to the difficulty in securing funding. It was a great achievement in terms of having some infrastructure projects start within that time period. Thankfully, obviously, economic situation vastly improved in those days, and I wouldn't say we've been falling over ourselves in lenders at the moment, but certainly there have been people expressing an interest in lending to the projects, one of which closed today. So then, PPP Co. role in construction. We're still thrall to our lenders. I mentioned that they have a technical advisor, so they visit monthly in terms of looking at and assessing the work and evaluating the payment due to the contractor. One of the things that's important to the PPP company then is that if there are any changes or variations to the works, that we look at them from a whole life point of view, because we are operating and maintaining the project for 25 years. Newlands Cross is slightly different to the N11 Arklow Rathnew in that we have a limited operations and maintenance scope at Newlands. We're not doing, for example, winter maintenance. We're not doing any of the, I suppose, regular or frequent elements. We still have the life cycle or major or capital maintenance obligation with Newlands Cross. And as I say, we operate and maintain for 25 years, and the NRA have handback requirements with regard to residual life, which we have to comply with. Okay, so that's my element of I'll hand over to Darren now.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Darren Devan. I'm a contracts manager with BAM, and I was responsible for the design and construction stage of the Newlands Cross upgrade scheme. So I will now describe some of the design and construction aspects of the scheme, including the scope of some of the challenges that we encountered during the design and construction stage and how we overcame them. I will describe the traffic management arrangements required to facilitate the construction of the flyover. I will talk briefly about some of the public relations requirements of the scheme and some initiatives that we implemented to make the construction stage more informative for the general public. And finally, I will talk about some of the value engineering concepts that we used, particularly the use of precast concrete elements. So following the financial on the 30th of April 2013, the design and construction stage commenced immediately. The works, as Kieran described earlier, comprised the construction of a new flyover of the N7 over the existing junction with the R113, Belgard and Fonthill roads. Extensive utility diversions and protection were required, which I will describe in a little bit more detail later on. There was a requirement for significant traffic management to allow for construction of the works, and this included the construction of significant temporary diversions. The scheme also included for the construction of accommodation works for affected landowners, landscaping, public lighting and traffic signalling works. Now, to describe some of the challenges encountered during the construction stage, I suppose while Newlands Cross is a major commuter route for the 80,000 or so motorists who pass through it every day, unfortunately for us, it's also a major arterial route for every utility known to man. So this just gives an example of what we encountered. We had Vodafone and cable and wireless, fibre optic cables, ESB underground and underground power lines to be diverted, UPC fibre optic cables, vast network of both copper and fibre optic cables, all of which had to be diverted through the junction. The RPA, or what was formerly known as the RPA, I think Kieran referred to the requirement in the contract for future proofing for the Metro West through the junction. So this included the provision of the track rail bed and associated ducting and drainage. Kieran also referred to the advance works contract, which diverted the 19-bar gas transmission main, which runs the length of the site. And while it was diverted under an advance contract, we still had a requirement to have a board gauge inspector on site when working anywhere in the vicinity of the transmission main, which was pretty much all the time during the construction stage. So Dublin County Council then had a network of asbestos cement water mains running right through the junction, all four corners of the junction. These water mains ranged in diameter from 450 mil to 750 millimetres, and really they were they posed a significant challenge during the construction stage, given their age at almost 40 years old, their brittle nature, and ultimately all the asbestos cement mains were replaced with ductile iron. So some of the other challenges faced during the construction stage included the requirement to maintain all lanes on the existing N7 between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. daily to cater for the traffic volumes going through every day. A 21-month design and build programme. Works outside of normal working hours, which was 7 to 7, required specific permissions from the local authorities and notification to local residents. We were required to maintain all existing utilities and all pedestrian and cyclist routes. There are a number of businesses located along the work site, including a number of hotels, motor dealers, restaurants and garages. So, you know, they were greatly affected by the construction works, and we had to work closely with them to ensure that their businesses survived through the construction stage, and we're happy to say that they did all survive through it, and they're thriving now, I believe. Although temporary lands were acquired for the construction of the temporary diversions, the space constraints on site were considerable and were significant, and probably led a lot to our decisions that we made in terms of construction methodology, the use of precast concrete elements, and our traffic management layouts. The traffic management measures themselves implemented on site, they required detailed design, which were all acknowledged by the authority under a certification process, and each traffic management layout and design was required to undergo an independent road safety audit stage 2 and 3. The traffic management plans also required close liaison and consultation with the Garda, emergency services, local authorities and bus companies. So I'll describe in a little bit more detail the traffic management arrangements that we implemented during the construction of the interchange of the flyover. And the works were constructed with 4 major traffic management phases. We had to be cognizant of the requirement to maintain all the required traffic lanes on the N7 during the works, in order to ensure that the 80,000 vehicles per day passing through the works did so without with minimal disruption. I suppose to that end we monitored the travel times that it took vehicles to travel through the junction during the course of the works, and I suppose that dictated certain tweaks or certain changes that we would make to the traffic management arrangements, and particularly the traffic signalling, the temporary traffic signalling at the junction, to reduce the tailbacks at Newlands Cross as much as possible. We were required to construct significant temporary diversions while constructing the flyover. All these temporary diversions were designed to the NRA DMRB standards, and includes road alignments, drainage, footpaths and road pavements themselves. So the images I'm going to show you, a number of slides, were generated from a combination of aerial photography and the actual temporary and permanent works design drawings. So phase 1 of the traffic management shows the existing N7 with a signalised junction at Newlands Cross. The construction works involved in phase 1 included the initial service diversions and the construction of the temporary diversionary roads, which you'll see on the right hand side there. So this slide just shows the view looking westbound, during phase 1 with the temporary lane construction in progress on the left hand side. Again, this slide just shows the view again looking westbound, closer to the junction. So again, you'll see temporary road construction in progress on the left-hand side, and the existing Naas Road layout with the signalised junction at Newlands Cross. So this took us to the end of January 2014, when the temporary road construction was completed and the N7 traffic was diverted onto the temporary diversionary route. So here we can see the N7, the inbound and outbound traffic lanes. So everything effectively was shifted to the south of the site, and this allowed for construction of the flyover approach embankments and indeed the permanent inbound slip lanes to be carried out. Again, you'll see here it's just a view heading westbound, heading towards Naas, on the western side of the junction. And just you see the hoarding line there adjacent to Newlands Golf Club on the left-hand side. It really was that tight. It really was millimetres to spare to fit all the required lanes in the space that we were given, but it was done. Again, this just shows a view looking inbound or citybound just on the approach to the junction, and you'll see there were the requirement at the junction for 3 straight ahead lanes, a left turning lane for Fonthill Road, and 2 right turning lanes for Belgard Road. So I think the junction, the inbound carriageway took up almost 20 metres in width, and the outbound carriageway took up just under 10 metres. So a lot of space required to facilitate the on the N7. This slide again shows the view looking towards the city. You can see the inbound and outbound carriageways. So in July 2014, Phase 3 was implemented. At this stage, we had the permanent inbound slip lanes constructed. You'll see them on the left-hand side, and flyover embankment construction was well progressed at this stage. During this phase, the N7 outbound lanes remained unchanged. However, the inbound traffic was split from a point out near Boot Road, with 2 traffic lanes running inbound to the left-hand side of the flyover, and we had 1 city-bound lane and 2 right-turning lanes for Belgard running on the south side of the flyover. So this is probably the most intricate layout used during the construction of the flyover. Again, this view just shows a shot closer to the junction, so you'll see the layout. Outbound remained unchanged, and inbound was split to south and north of the flyover. This view then shows the layout in Phase 3, just looking in the opposite direction. And so the reason why this phase was required was to allow us to complete the embankment construction on the western side of the junction, and to complete the centre pier construction for the bridge structure. Here we can see the Phase 3 layout on the approach to the junction from the Naas side. This is down one side of the embankment. You see the 1 straight ahead lane for the city, and the 2 right turning lanes for Belgard Road. This view then just shows where the temporary roads tied into the existing N7 on the approach to the M50 Red Cow interchange. So then Phase 4 was carried out from November 2014. At this stage, the N7 traffic had been diverted up onto the new flyover, and this allowed us to complete the road realignment works to Belgard and Fonthill Road, the permanent outbound slip lanes, and during the phase we also carried out all the reinstatement works, removal of the temporary diversions that were used during Phase 2 and 3. So some of the public relations aspects to the scheme included a feature hoarding, dedicated website and telephone line, quarterly newsletters which were distributed to local residents, schools and libraries. A public relations officer was appointed from the outset, and we also had a traffic management liaison group which included representatives from the authority, PPP company, contractor, local authority, emergency services and bus companies. So that group was quite a group which convened regularly to discuss upcoming traffic management arrangements and to review any issues that are on the construction stage. So a site hoarding was required to be constructed along the southern boundary of the site, and I suppose at almost 2 kilometres long. We decided to use the hoarding as somewhat of an artistic feature to give members of the public and passing motorists some information about the scheme in I suppose, a more light-hearted manner than we'd be used to seeing on construction sites. So we developed the art of construction to provide this information, which was effectively what goes into making Newlands Cross. So we had a bit of fun trying to come up with the statistics, and some people wondered we come up with the 124 kilometres of pipes, but I assure you there was science behind it somewhere. But it was well received, and we got some very good feedback from members of the public in relation to the hoarding. Finally, I'm going to talk about some of the value engineering concepts used on the scheme. They were used essentially to secure the programme, to reduce the cost, and to overcome the space constraints on site. So the first one, the reinforced earth embankments. The EIS and the contract required that the reinforced earth embankment walls were clad in limestone. So with almost 6,300 square metres or 1,600 individual panels, we developed a solution to manufacture the wall panels off-site with the stone set into the concrete panels immediately after casting. The centre pier crosshead was precast and lifted into place. The high containment wall panels, which were a requirement due to the future proofing for Metro West, were constructed off-site in a similar manner to the reinforced earth embankment walls. Parapet edge beams were also precast, and the high containment curbs used on the slip lanes, instead of being precast, we extruded them on site, which gave us an advantage in terms of outputs and reduced construction time. So here we can see the manufacturing process for the embankment walls. So the first photograph just shows the wall panel being prepared for casting with the reinforcing steel in place. Secondly, we can see the panel immediately after casting. So at this stage here, the individual stones were placed by hand and set into the wet concrete. And once the concrete was cured, the panels were stacked, stored precaster's yard and delivered to site as and when required. So here we can see the finished product with the reinforced earth wall panels. So effectively the construction technique was the same as for any reinforced earth panel, the only difference being that these were significantly heavier than we would usually use, but still easy enough to manage on site. So as I said, the requirement to future-proof for Metro West meant that a high containment parapet wall was required across the Metro West envelope. The H4A wall sections were constructed in a similar manner to the reinforced earth wall panels. So this part here was constructed in exactly the same manner as the reinforced earth wall panels. Then the standard precast parapet edge beams. These two panels then were connected together in the fabricator's yard, and the entire unit was lifted into place. The units were propped, as you'll see in the arrangement on the photograph, and held in place until they were connected to the deck slab with an in situ concrete stitch. So you'll just see one of those being prepared. And here we can see both the standard parapet edge beams and the high containment walls during installation. The centre pier crosshead was precast in two sections with an in situ stitch to connect the two pieces. Each unit weighed 52 tonnes and they were craned into position. Now, precasting of these units was considered, I suppose, nearly the only option, because an in situ solution would have required extensive false work and temporary works right in the middle of the junction, where we effectively didn't have space to maintain all the traffic lanes. Another consideration was to try and protect such false work from being struck by traffic while we would construct it, meant that precasting really was the only option. So this shows the installation of the beams for the bridge deck. The bridge is a fully integral structure spanning 67.2 metres with two equal 33.6 metre spans, constructed using W13 beams with an in situ reinforced concrete deck slab. The beam installation took place on 3 consecutive nights under lane closures of the N7, so we were able to keep the N7 open, just reduce the lanes down at night time. And the installation was carried out using 2 750-tonne mobile cranes. So that was completed in July 2014. So this photograph from July 2014 again just shows the traffic management layout with traffic running on the temporary lanes while the approach embankment construction progresses. And you might see there actually something different that we utilised was the use of orange road markings to denote the temporary layout, or the temporary, basically the traffic was travelling through a work zone under a 60 kilometres per hour speed limit. I think it was quite effective. Again, this just shows a view of the scheme in its entirety, so you can probably see the scale there, and even the traffic volumes on both sides of the junction. Again, this just shows the arrangement closer to the junction, and I suppose the N7 traffic was one element of it, but the traffic volumes on Belgard and Fonthill Road were considerable, and needed to be catered for as well. Again, you'll see this is the approach embankments almost complete, with Banksy construction well advanced and ready for the beam installation. So in the space of 17 months, we went from a situation where we had something like this, which was tailbacks and gridlock, to this photograph, which was taken immediately prior to official opening of the flyover on the 18th of November 2014 by Minister Pascal Donoghue. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I have to compliment our cultured audience for knowing to wait until the 3 movements were finished before applauding. For the encore, there's audience participation, so if you wouldn't mind, for any questions you may have for any of our panel, for the benefit of those people who are watching on webcast, if you might just ask Oliver raise your hand, and Oliver will give you the microphone before you ask the question. So, does anyone want to start us off? I might ask one first question that I don't think he told us, but without asking anything too sensitive or contractual, can you give us an idea for the value of the scheme? The Newlands Cross element then.
Yeah, well, the construction cost, I mean, without being tender prices,
No,
we carried out
So even in the low growth scenario, the benefits then are at least 400 million.
Helen Hughes from TII. Darren, just a question for you about your photo montage slides explaining the traffic management. Did you prepare them for this presentation, or were they done years ago when you were trying to explain your traffic management to the client?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Yes, they were prepared at the construction stage. And it allowed us to ensure that our traffic management arrangement that we were designing would fit. So it was prepared a number of years ago, not just for this evening.
For the benefit of anyone watching online, I've just realised that our speakers are probably not on camera, and so we've given them a microphone, but they're sitting comfortably, so I won't ask them to move. Any other questions?
No, we've moved to orange lane markings to distinguish between your normal road layout and the fact that you're within the zone.
But is that in the traffic signs manual?
I'm pretty certain it is, yeah.
Hi there, my name is Ali Gleeson from PMC Limited. Two questions. I think during the presentation, I understand that it was a consultant who tested or modelled the traffic management arrangements prior to contract award. Was there any contractor involvement in the development of that traffic management prior to contractor award?
No, there wasn't. Our consulting engineers were the original consultants who took the scheme through the planning process. Now we insisted we did not want to go into an oral hearing without having a robust traffic management scheme that we could demonstrate would work. So Arab went into a very detailed design, firstly deciding on how to go about building this, what would be the logical construction sequence, and then determining then where the traffic had to go to be able to build it in this sequence. So as I said during the presentation, it proved very useful, although it could be argued maybe that's something for the contractor to do. The contractor is responsible for designing the traffic management. But we didn't want to be in a position where insufficient lands were provided to the contractor, and we found it almost impossible, if not impossible, to build a scheme and keep the traffic flowing to a satisfactory level. As Darren indicated, maybe Darren's view would be that we didn't provide enough land, and you saw how tight it was there, even with the temporary lanes built on the southern side of the scheme. There was no spare area there at all for working space, etc. But there was no contractor involved. That was a design done by our consulting engineers.
Okay, thank you. The last question was essentially what happens in 2040. So what performance spec is got to be upheld before the road is handed back to the TII?
Yeah, well, as Yvonne mentioned, they're responsible for the life cycle and the heavy maintenance, really. The routine and cyclic maintenance goes to the MARC contractor, who is looking after the N7 network for us. But there are requirements built into the contract that there must be a residual life of 10 years on the road pavement before it's handed back. So each element has a residual life, the big one really being a 10-year on the road pavement.
One more.
Question Question for Yvonne. Just interested to hear that you worked on the M25 project, and you were involved in PPP projects, availability projects in the UK. Is there anything that we do radically different, or better, or worse, or how would you compare the UK and Irish experience?
I think actually the PPP contract is broadly similar. Maybe a couple of years possibly behind in adopting it, and we've used the UK have shied away in many instances from using tolls. At one stage, they were using what was called a shadow toll mechanism, where they did look at counting the number of cars and HGVs and basing the payment on that, but never moved to tolling. Whereas I think probably the Irish government were braver here at the right time, probably in adopting tolls. Hard tolls are definitely would be more difficult to finance at the moment because of what's happened in terms of traffic numbers, traffic volumes decreasing. But certainly, as I said during the presentation, the National Roads Authority would be a very highly regarded procuring authority among the lenders and investors. Question?
Brian Hamilton from Staveley and Partners. I don't think we've mentioned at all any congratulations to the project team as a whole on the success of achieving the relief of the bottleneck at Newlands Cross. I was a weekly user of that junction, and really the success was not only during the construction, achieving the traffic flows through the junction. I'd say probably not much worse than it was before you started, but also the final product. I mean, it's such a relief. The journey time is so much easier from the west. I suppose my question really is to all three of you individually. The usual thing at an opening of a scheme is it was brought in on time, on budget. Did that happen for each of you?
Well, if I start, I mean, again, I said it in the presentation that Newlands Cross, it was fantastic. It was the first opening that we had, but until all sections were available, then the PPP company didn't start getting paid. So probably July was more important in that context. But I'll hand you over to the others.
Yeah, I mean, the opening of the flyover itself, which was November of last year, and it got a lot of publicity at the time, but really the opening of the flyover was just phase 4 in the traffic management, in that there was still an awful lot of works to be done after the opening. Now, this was a cause of upset to the locals who were looking at the news and seeing the opening of the ribbon and the fact that the Newlands team had been delivered well ahead of programme, but still there was a huge amount of work still to be done on the Bellegarde and Fonthill roads, on the westbound slip lanes, etc., which were still to go on for many months, as was programmed to do. But yeah, we were very happy that the flyover opened early and relieved that congestion. It was of huge benefit for local commuters. I do remember one particular. I follow what the general public were saying on boards.ie. There was actually a thread there on Newlands Cross, and you got people commenting on how good that BAM were doing with traffic management, etc. So one comment on just the day of the opening, which it opened, the ribbon was cut on the 18th of November, but the actual didn't open to traffic until the 20th of November. And one commuter said on boards that from now on she felt that the 20th of November should be known as Newlands Cross Day.
Not really. Ahead of time, not sure.
All right, is that more or less it? One more.
Liam Prendeville, Halcor Barry. Kieran, the scheme was originally conceived as a design and build scheme, and because of the financial situation within the country, it was pulled and it went forward as a PPP. What's the future of PPP now that the country appears to be in a better financial position?
It's a very good question. You're probably aware with the capital plan announcement there only last week, the government had said we were going forward with 3 PPP projects, and one of those is already at construction, the N17 and 18. The other one mentioned was the M11 Enniscorthy scheme, which, as Vaughan mentioned, was reached contract close just today, and the other one being the M25 Ross bypass, which again very well advanced and coming close to financial close. So no other PPP schemes were mentioned in the capital plan. So that's an indication that PPPs are gone out of favour. I'm not quite sure. We still have to wait. And there were a number of other schemes mentioned in the plan which we thought might be progressed as PPP, but certainly didn't come across in the recent announcement. So it's wait and see.
All right. Okay, well listen, before I ask our PRO, Oliver, to give the vote of thanks, I'm just going to notify of upcoming events. Our next upcoming event is by the CEO of the National Transport Authority, Anne Graham, on the 11th of November. And she's going to tell us about the transport strategy, or the draft transport strategy for the Greater Dublin area 2015 to 2035, which I understand is to be published imminently. And although I don't have financial or committee approval to say this yet, we're going to have a little networking event afterwards, and we're going to put on a few glasses of wine courtesy of Engineers Ireland. So if anyone would like to hang around after that lecture and see what the Roads and Transport Society does, you'd be very welcome to attend. Further planned events then are the CEO of Dublin Port Company is going to come into us in February. We don't normally do anything in December or January because it's difficult to get people to attend. But he's going to give us an update on their master plan and the various significant projects they're advancing in Dublin Port at the minute. So that'll be quite interesting. Meanwhile as well, and while the date isn't fully nailed down yet, we're looking at doing a sort of seminar aimed at younger professionals largely, but not exclusively, through recapping first principles engineering on various aspects, link design, junction design, etc. And we're trying, in that program, it's challenging, but what we're trying to do is cover both the urban and rural context, because it's a challenge for engineers having to deal with both and the applicability of standards between one and the other. So they're all planned. That seminar will hopefully happen this side of Christmas, but if not, I'd expect it in February. So, on my own behalf, I'd like to thank you all for attending and being such a good audience. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers. And Oliver, if you wouldn't mind now coming up here to the podium, you're going to have to get used to next year and give the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the Roads and Transportation Society, I'd just like to thank our 3 speakers tonight. I think the data that Kieran provided, or the context that Kieran provided in relation to issues such as why the main line went over the road and was very beneficial. It's something I wouldn't have noticed myself, the underlying bedrock conditions being a particular design constraint. I think in terms of the foresight for the inclusion of additional lands for the traffic management plans was there's great credit deserved to all involved in the project. Thanks to Yvonne, we got 3 for the price of 1 tonight. We had the N7, the N11, and also the Gorey service area. Setting up of a special purpose vehicle is quite a complex and challenging process, and in such an an environment of economics, it must have been an incredible challenge, and well done to all involved on that. And finally then to Darren, who gave us a great overview construction process. I'm surprised, given all the utility diversions that he had to deal with, I'm surprised you're not still out there moving some of the utilities. And what a great idea for the lightheartedness in terms of the construction, the art of construction. I'm sure it was very entertaining for those stuck in traffic at the junction. So once again, just on behalf of the Roads and Transportation Society, I'd like to thank the three speakers for their presentation, and if you could just demonstrate your gratitude by putting your hands together, please.